מתי י"ג או מתי 13. ואנחנו נקרא את המשל הבא.
And we'll read the next parable.
נקרא מ-24 עד 30.
From verse 24 to 30.
קודם מ-24 עד 30. וישם לפניהם.
Another parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. And now we'll continue in verse 36 until verse 43. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Last time that we learnt from Matthew, we learnt about the parable of the sower, and we learnt that the seed in that parable is the word of the kingdom, or the word of the gospel. And that seed falls in 4 different places, and we looked at the 4 types of ground, and we saw in each place what happens. And the 4th place, which was the good ground, was the best place where the seed grew and bore fruit. So that was the first parable in a series of parables that Jesus began to teach in chapter 13. And he began to teach in parables after the Pharisees accused him that he is doing his miracles and casting out demons by the power of Satan. So after they accused him of this, Jesus took a step back. He stepped away from the nation, and now he decided that he would teach only in parables. And he began to behave in a more selective manner. And we see it already in verse 10. If you look in the same chapter in verse 10, it's written, the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" It was strange to them that suddenly Jesus had suddenly begun teaching in parables, and he told them, because to you it has been given to know, and to them not. And he explained only to the disciples what was the meaning of the parable. And again we see it in our passage in verse 36. It's written, "Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, 'Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. Please explain to us.'" But when does he explain to them? After he's sent the whole nation home, now he explains to his disciples in the home. See, it begins as selective behavior. It's as though the nation doesn't want me, okay, so they won't hear. And those who hear will not understand. It's a bit surprising to see how the Lord Jesus behaves. But we need to see how Jesus behaves and to understand him according to the scriptures, not according to our concepts in our own minds, that Jesus is always nice and so on. It's not always so. So in our parable, and we can call it the parable of the wheat, which you make bread from, and tares. That is an old Hebrew word used. It's a bad seed that produces fiber that looks like wheat at the time, but it cannot be used for anything good. It has to be thrown out. So that's the wheat and tares. That is the parable that Jesus told. And the parable talks about someone who sowed good seed. That's Jesus. And this time the good seed is not the word of the Lord. It is the sons of the kingdom, those who are going to inherit the kingdom and to be in the kingdom. That is the seed that Jesus sowed in the world. And in summary, it's the believers. And then you have the bad seed, the tares. While the reapers were sleeping, the enemy of the sower came, and who is Satan, and he took bad seed of the tares and he put that in the field as well. And afterward, they see, when the plants are growing, they see that some produce fruit, but some is not good. It is not wheat. And they don't understand what is happening here. You sowed good seed. And he says, yes, an enemy has done this. And his enemy, Jesus' enemy, is Satan. So we understand from Jesus' explanation, are the angels. And they say, do you want us to take them out? And he says, no, otherwise you will harm the good wheat. Let them grow together. And afterwards, at the end, we will take out the tares and burn them, and the good wheat will be gathered into the barn. And that is the parable in general. And that is generally what Jesus taught in this parable. But what is this parable speaking about? This parable is speaking about the end of the world. What will happen at the end of the world? Jesus explained it. He says, leave it until the harvest. Don't touch the seed until harvest. And he explained that the harvest is the end of the world. But there are a few ends. There is the end of this world. Then there is the age to come. This age or world is until Jesus came and brought his judgment, and the world to come is the beginning of the kingdom of Jesus on earth. So when it's written the end of the world, the meaning is the end of this age, the end of this period that we know, and the beginning of the new age that Jesus will establish here on earth. Now, what does this parable teach us? It teaches us a few things. It teaches us that we need sometimes to wait for the last stage, and not to act too quickly. Against something evil that we see happening. Sometimes plants grow together in the same place, and at the beginning they look the same, and you see no difference. They look the same. And sometimes we judge too quickly. What you thought was wheat is something else. What you thought was not wheat is wheat. We judge too quickly, and we act too quickly, and we can do damage. Sometimes you need to let something grow first and see the fruit, and then you will know what it is. More than this, you might know, you might understand that one sprout or plant is bad and the other is good. It's wheat and it will bring fruit. You see it at an early stage relatively. But if you now act and pluck it out, you will damage the wheat. Because sometimes they grow so close together that you can't take out one without damaging the other. So sometimes even when you know that one is wheat and one is a tare, you don't act immediately to pull out the tare. You wait so that it will be clearer to take out the tare. That's also a lesson for us, for our lives. Sometimes we need to wait and not to act too fast. We see something evil and it's in its early stages. Sometimes you need to wait and say, I see the direction is not good, but let's wait and see how it develops, and then we'll do something. To wait for the right time to act. That's a little bit of a lesson for us. And many believers think it is speaking about the church. Why? Because in a church, in a normal church, in the whole world, you have wheat and tares. In every church. From all the believers in the world, there are, out of all those who say they are believers, there are those who are truly believers, and those who only say that they are, but they are not really they are a bad plant. And we want to wait and see the fruit. And according to the fruit, we will know. Not everyone who goes to church is wheat. So that's something that we have in our minds. But it's not actually speaking about the church, this passage. He says the field is the world. The field is the world. And it's talking about what will happen at the end of the world. Yes, there is a similar situation in the church, but this is talking about the end of the world. And what we learn here is that at the end of the world, God doesn't already now act to root out the wicked from the earth. He's waiting for his own time. And that is the time when Jesus returns. And when Jesus returns, then, before the kingdom of Jesus Christ begins, he will send his angels, and they will take the wicked out of the world and throw them in fire in hell. And that is some new detail, new information that we didn't have in another place. It is something new that we learn now from Jesus. We can understand from the scriptures that we are found in a time after Jesus' first coming, when he gave his life on the cross. He ascended to heaven, and we are waiting for him to return. Now, when he returns, he will make a great judgment, and after that judgment, there will be the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. So now we are found in a period that is bringing us slowly, to the great judgment and the 1,000-year reign of Jesus in Israel and over the whole world. So that is the period that we are now found in. After the 1,000 years, there will be another great judgment that is called the Great White Throne Judgment. Here we have many white seats, but that is the Great White Throne of God. And then he will judge the wicked, and he will throw them to hell, and then will start eternity. The period that will never end. We will be with Yeshua forever. The 1,000-year reign will come to an end. It will lead into the eternal age. So in this period that we are in now, we are before the judgment, before those evil things that are going to happen, and Jesus' judgment when he returns. And then the 1,000 years begin. That is Jesus' kingdom. That is what we understand from scriptures, but we didn't know exactly what would happen after Jesus comes. We didn't know what would happen with the wicked. How would they get to hell? How will his kingdom begin? Would he begin his kingdom with wicked and righteous together? How would it work? And here Jesus tells us that before the kingdom begins, the angels will come and take the wicked and throw them in the fire of hell. This is a technical detail that we didn't know before, a logistical detail, that the angels will physically help with this thing. And I think it will happen after the judgment of the sheep and goats. There's the sheep and goat judgment. And after that judgment, what will happen to all the wicked? The angels will come and will already throw them in hell. And then the kingdom will begin with only the righteous. And that is how it will start. And that is what Jesus is teaching in this parable. And we see it in verse 41. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those who practice lawlessness. Jesus will send his angels. They will take everyone who causes stumbling and everyone who practices lawlessness and throw them. And where will he throw them? This is interesting, verse 42. Where will they be thrown? In verse 42. He will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. The furnace of fire, where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Brothers and sisters, this is frightening. The furnace of fire, there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. Wailing is like crying. Gnashing of teeth is from pain. So much pain that they gnash their teeth together, and that is in the furnace of fire. Now, maybe a year ago or something like that, I saw a video on internet of believers, and they explained there. Don't worry. They didn't say don't worry, but they said when it's written about fire, it's not really fire. And they explained why. They have long explanations. Why, when it's written fire in the scriptures about the lake of fire, it's not really fire. And they had all kinds of explanations why it's not really fire. But I want to remind you something. Jesus, when he told this parable in verses 24 to 30, he told the parable and he said that the reapers would take the tares and burn it with fire. So here you could say maybe to burn doesn't mean necessarily with fire, it's just a parable. But now in verse 36 to 43, he explains the parable. He's explaining it. And what does he say? That they will take them and put them in the furnace of fire. That is the explanation of the parable. So what am I supposed to understand? I think that the believers who made this video, maybe they are smarter than God. They know better than God what he meant to say. And this is not the only place that it is written, that it is fire. It is written in almost every place that speaks about hell and about the lake of fire. It's written the furnace of fire, eternal fire, 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 fire. Throughout all the scriptures, hell is described as fire. But there are people who are smarter than God. So I am stupid. I'm stupid. I understand that fire is fire. That when it's written, he takes them and throws them into fire, it is fire. It is not just unpleasant. It's not just an unpleasant place to be. It is fire. And this is the judgment of God. And this is a heavy judgment, and it's good that people will know this. We cannot make God something else. When we read in the scriptures and we see, wow, God is going to throw people in fire, and then we develop a theory, no, God is a God of love, he won't throw people in fire, how could he do such a thing? These are theories of men. These are theories of men, and I will not tolerate them. When people say that God will not throw people in fire, they touch the holiness of God. God is holy. And God is angry about sin. He is holy and very angry about sin. And when someone goes through his whole life and he doesn't want to believe in God for whatever reason, maybe he's a nice person, but he doesn't want to hear, thank you, I have my life. God is angry at that, and he will not forgive. If that person will not believe in God before he dies, he will suffer in fire. This is the truth of the scriptures, and nothing less. So if all kinds of people come and say that this is not so, there will not be fire. And there are some who say, yes, there will be fire, but it's not eternal. But it is eternal. Or there are those who say, yes, there is eternal fire, but your soul will not live forever. You will suffer a little, and then you'll cease to exist. And this is also not true. The wailing and gnashing of teeth is forever. It is eternal suffering. And it's good that people would know this, that they wouldn't listen to theories of Judaism, of Catholicism, and Jehovah's Witness, and Adventists. So many theories there are in all these places about how actually someone won't burn forever, and it is not true. A non-believer, his place is in hell forever. Why? Because that is what God does to someone who does not believe. It is written in John that those who do not believe is judged already. The wrath of God will fall on him, and this is what it's speaking about. And we do not want a God who is less holy. We cannot make an individual invitation to God, or that he would be as we want him to be. We don't want him less holy. We don't want him less angry with sin, or less holy than he is. And it's important to always be concerned to be on God's right side. If on one side he stretches out a hand of mercy, and with the other hand he warns you, then it's worthwhile to you to go to his grace. And his grace is found in Jesus Christ. And there, in Jesus Christ, there is grace for the greatest sinner. Maybe you've done terrible things in your life. People murdered and received forgiveness from God. People raped and repented from their wicked deeds. In prison, but they repented. They understood that they deserve to go to hell, but they also knew that God forgives every sin if they would only ask him for forgiveness in the name of Jesus. And that is the outstretched arm of God. to everyone who believes, he will receive forgiveness of sins. Why? Because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because what Jesus did on the cross. If Jesus had not died on the cross, we would not have that grace. But when Jesus died on the cross and shed his blood, that is when God put on him all of the anger that would have been ours, so that those who believe in him, those who believe in Jesus, will not need to receive that punishment. He will receive full forgiveness from God for what he has done. Jesus paid the price for him, for every sin. The great sins, the so-called small sins, for every sin that you've done in your life, and there's a long list for everyone. God forgives because of what Jesus did. And this is more important than the theories about whether there is fire or not. It's important to know that we need to be saved from that fire and to be on the right side of God so that we will not receive that fire. And this is, of course, through his Son, Jesus Christ. This is what shows us that the cross of Jesus was so necessary, so important. Without it, it would be impossible to receive grace. Jesus didn't come, and what a tragedy he was killed. It isn't that way. This was the purpose of God. God sent him so that he would be killed. Out of mercy for us. And therefore it's important to come to Jesus in faith. And let's look at verse 43. In verse 43, after the angels come and take all of the wicked and put them in hell, in verse 43, Jesus says, "Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father." Now the kingdom begins, and the righteous will shine like the sun. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Those who have ears to understand this parable, let them hear and understand what Jesus is teaching. So he makes a distinction between the righteous and the wicked. The righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of heaven. And this reminds us, and when Jesus said this, he is regarding something specific, which is from the book of Daniel. So remember these words, that they will shine like the sun, and turn to the book of Daniel. That's the second passage that we'll look at today. Daniel. I think. Daniel 12. And we'll read the first 3 verses. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince, who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. That is the first verse. So in verse 1, at that time Michael will stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. When it's written at that time, that's to say in the last days, before the beginning of the kingdom of Christ. In the book of Daniel, those who don't know, it was written a few hundred years before Jesus. And it says, at that time, the last years before the kingdom of Christ begins, Michael, the great prince, will stand up. There are many angels in heaven, and the one responsible for all of the angels is Michael. And Michael is an angel of high rank, that one of the things he's responsible for is the nation of Israel. He's responsible to watch over the nation of Israel. And it's written that he stands over the sons of Israel, watching to see what's happening, and there will be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that time. That's to say, we're now in a period of great tribulation in this verse. In verse 1, it's not right now, it will happen later. This tribulation, we read about it in the book of Revelation. All of the catastrophes that are written about in Revelation, the apocalypse of Revelation, are in the great tribulation. This that's written about in other scriptures, the time of Jacob's trouble. And here it's written that this trouble is the greatest tribulation ever. And there were many tribulations, including the Second World War and so on. There were many catastrophes, but this tribulation, which has not yet arrived, will be the greatest of all of them. And it's written, at that time, I'm still reading in verse 1, your people will be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. God will preserve the nation of Israel. He's called Daniel's nation, your nation. It's the nation of Israel. Your people will be delivered. God will help them to escape and be preserved alive. And he adds, everyone who is found written in the book. Only those that are written as survivors. So it's not all the nation, because we know from other places that actually most of the nation will die. From the book of Revelation, we know that most of humanity, most of the people on earth will die during this time. But from the Old Testament, we understand specifically that most of Israel will die, and only the ones written in the book will remain alive. And in verse 2, it's written, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. So it's written, many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Many of those who are sleeping in the earth will rise. Not all, many. Why? Because this here is speaking about the resurrection only of the righteous. In Judaism, there's a concept of the resurrection of the righteous. That's what they call it. A Jewish man asked me, "Do you believe in the resurrection of the righteous?" And I said, "Yes." I checked what is the resurrection of the righteous, and their concept in Judaism, as compared to the concept of the believers, is similar. First of all, both in Judaism and the believers, they believe in the resurrection. That's something that we and the religious Jews think the same about. And there are things that we and the religious Jews agree about. We're not at war on everything. But what the religious call the resurrection of the righteous, the believers call the first resurrection. And that is only for the saints of the Old Testament, the saints who lived in the Old Testament period, and those who died in the tribulation. It's written, these will rise to everlasting life. They will rise to what? To everlasting life. These are all the righteous of the Old Testament, those who believed in God and walked after Him. People like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses and David. These will rise, and not only them, but many others who walked with God in the Old Testament period, they will rise in this resurrection. Then it continues in verse 2, and these to shame and everlasting contempt. So part of those who rise will rise to everlasting contempt. These will go there and these there. Now here it's written together, but when we understand from all the scriptures, it doesn't happen at the same time. There's the resurrection of the believers, the righteous. That's called the first resurrection. The resurrection of the wicked will happen after the 1,000-year reign. It's a resurrection to judgment. God will raise them only to judge them and send them to hell. But here, at this stage, just before the kingdom begins, those who are already alive, the wicked who are alive, we know from Jesus and also from here, they will be taken and put in hell already. Why? To begin the kingdom clean, only from believers and righteous people. So that's verse 2. Many of those who sleep, not all, in the dust of the earth shall awake, these to everlasting life, and these to shame and everlasting contempt. The wicked who are already alive will be sent to hell, and the rest of the wicked will wait until after the 1,000-year reign, and only then God will raise them for judgment. It is not a resurrection to life like we will live in God, but it's a resurrection to be judged and sent to hell. And then look in verse 3. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament. and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. In modern Hebrew it sounds like educated people, but in the Old Testament the wise are those who know God. The wise, those who are just, will shine like the brightness of the firmament. It's very similar to the words of Jesus, who said the righteous will shine like the sun. And Jesus is regarding these verses from Daniel. The wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Those who justified many, who caused others to be righteous by preaching to them about the faith in Jesus Christ. They are those who justify many. They have believed themselves and led others to believe in Jesus, and then they also cease being wicked and start to be righteous. So they will shine, it says, like the stars forever and ever. And they will never die again. They will live forever and will always shine. The believers, from the time that Jesus comes back, then for the believers there will be no more death anymore. And we won't need to be afraid of death. All the believers will have only good. So here, this is the wise are the wheat, and the wicked are the tares, the bad plants. These go to everlasting life, and these to everlasting contempt. And something else that we notice here. Notice that there's nothing in the middle. There's nothing in the middle with God. There's no eternal life and eternal contempt and something else in the middle for nice people that didn't believe. There's no place in the middle. With God, there are the righteous and the wicked, and that's it. There are the wise and the foolish, black and white, eternal life and hell. There's nothing in the middle. With God, if you are not righteous, you're wicked. If you are not going to heaven, you're going to hell. There's nothing in the middle. This is something important to remember. If we're not sure where we are, we need to make sure that we're in the right place with God. And the way to be in the right place with God is through Jesus Christ. Those who believe in Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross, He's no longer in the middle, and He's not on the left, He's on the right. He's on the side of the righteous. Also, if we continue to sin. And of course, a true believer will overcome sin. God will help him, but all the believers sin. But God will consider him righteous. Why? Only because he believed in Jesus Christ. If he or we come to God and ask forgiveness in the name of Jesus Christ, then we are on the good side of God, on the side of the righteous, of the wise. This is what we learn from this parable of Jesus in Matthew 13. And we hope to do more parables, maybe 2 or 3 next week.